tonight, war drum. It's why America is sleepwalking into a war with Iran and its proxies, the one thing President Biden can do to stop it. Face the music.
What do you think is the most important question that needs to be answered from both candidates?
Who won the last election?
How Trump can flip the script on Thursday night. No fun of any kind.
They confiscated everything, even the stuff we didn't steal.
They took the bar!
Americans are already drinking less. Can the government just take the bar?
Ah, thanks. I needed that.
All right, we are 50 hours away from the first presidential debate this Tuesday evening. Welcome to the fairest show on television. And first tonight, the debate is where we start. Knockout versus strikeout. All the pregame you're hearing about the debate is missing the most important thing. There are only a few things that can happen at Thursday's debate, just a very few that are going to matter. It may happen, it may not happen. But if it does, you'll know it when it happens. We're going to look back on that moment and say that is when the race changed. Period. And candidates can do it themselves. They can do it to each other. The coming 90 minutes can win or lose a presidential race. It is the big moments, and we can all go back and debate history and watch those tapes. We all remember the lines. They're not about policy. They're moments. Those change presidential races. The incremental attacks about how often Biden talks about threats to democracy or how often people ask Trump about January 6th don't matter. Trump knows it well. And suddenly now, and this is very interesting, in the past 48 hours, he is changing drastically the expectations game.
And he beat Paul Ryan. So I'm not underestimating him. It is what it is. We'll see what happens. I assume he's going to be somebody that will be a worthy debater.
It's interesting, right? Because a few weeks ago, Biden was the worst president who Trump said he would pummel in the debate. He was asking crowds if he should go easy on him or interrupt him all the time. Now, not so much. And there will be no bigger moment than when Donald Trump is asked about the 2020 election. And it is going to come up.
What do you think is the most important question that needs to be answered from both candidates?
Who won the last election?
Yeah.
Very simple.
It is very simple. And Trump's team will call that rigged and gotcha and everything else. But Trump still says he won the 2020 election, so it's a fair question. So it's a question about January 6th. That is going to set the tone for everything else. Here's how Donald Trump has answered in the past.
We're not going to allow them to rig the presidential election of 2024. You know what they ought to do? They ought to release the J6 hostages. They've suffered enough. Can you see the spirit from the hostages? And that's what they are, as hostages. They've been treated terribly.
With us now, George Will, NewsNation senior political contributor, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. Welcome back, sir. Good to see you. Given the state of play right now, who has more of the ability to land a knockout blow and who has more of a risk of striking out?
I believe Mr. Biden, because this is a strenuous period in his life. He's gone back and forth to Europe. He's going to get up there, and for 90 minutes, he cannot make a mistake, and he knows he cannot make a mistake. There's something ghoulish, Leland, about this nation watching its chief executive and wondering if he can hold it together for 90 minutes.
Does simply holding it together enter into he's answered the age question and now everybody has to move on?
Yes, I think if he gets through this and he has some Adderall moments, that is, moments of almost excessive energy, as he showed in the State of the Union address, that will enable people to say, well, he passed that test and we can go on. It's hard to see how Mr. Trump can injure himself in the same way.
It's
other than in answering that question.
Right, other than answering 2020 and January 6th.
Well, it's one thing to say, I won this rigged election when you're in front of 20,000 screaming supporters. It's another thing to say, I defeated the man standing next to me. The follow-up question then would be, okay, Mr. Trump, if Mr. Biden's not the legitimate president, does that mean that all the laws enacted over his signature are illegitimate somehow? It's rather consequential to deny that for 4 years we've had an illegitimate president.
Well, to be fair, though, his strongest supporters are worried about that. Bill O'Reilly, who your thoughts aside of, and Charlie Kirk were discussing that very issue last night. Take a listen.
I think that Trump's obsession with 2020, all right, still continues to hurt him in this election. Am I wrong?
So first, I'll say that there's a season for all things. And when it was really let's just say a recent wound, I think it was helpful to talk about ways we could have secured the election better and things we could have done better in 2020.
Went on to say we need to move on to this. Trump's people know he's vulnerable here.
Well, the Trump people are behaving differently this time around because last time Mr. Trump said the mail-in ballots are inherently fraudulent and open to fraud. Now Republicans are saying, please, we're getting in the game. We know that mail ballots are part of the landscape now. So the Republicans have moved on. Mr. Trump hasn't, and he's ignoring the fundamental axiom that elections are always about the future.
Crooked Joe Biden is the worst debater I've ever faced. This is Trump. He can't put two sentences together. Crooked is also the worst president in the history of the United States by far. Okay, so you could expect some of that.
Do you expect that kind of rhetoric on the stage coming up?
Do you not?
I don't. I think Mr. Trump this time around has more adult supervision in his camp, and I think they're going to tell him the country would really be interested in seeing a gentleman, as close as you can approximate a gentleman. That is someone who is not an embarrassment in your living room and you don't want to shield the children's eyes.
Okay, and you can't really plan the knockout moments, the delivered punches, right? Or we don't know what they're planning in their debate prep. May happen, may not. The shut-up man from Joe Biden seemed to be extemporaneous and unplanned. That said, there's a chance this ends up in a draw, right? That neither side really did much. Everybody kind of did what they expected. And Joe Biden doesn't excel and have some moment where he delivers clarity. But at the same time, he doesn't have any senior moments that everybody goes, God, we have to do something else. So Democrats are left with the current state of the race. Would Democrats be better off, all else equal, for either Joe Biden to have a great night or so terrible a night they must have an honest conversation about replacing him on the ticket?
They need a great night, but it's hard to understand what a great night would be. A draw would serve the Democrats because the economy is doing well. The economy is the envy of the world right now, the U.S. economy. And polls, Leland, are beginning to show it. Small, incremental gains. You've got till November to make cumulative incremental gains, and he wins.
So simply playing for a draw for Joe Biden is a win.
The incumbent wins.
Is there not a risk, though, that if Joe Biden does not put the age question to rest, but isn't so bad that Democrats then have to have the uncomfortable conversation that everyone's talking about them having, but they won't admit that they're having, that may be the worst case scenario?
An uneventful night, I think, puts the age question to rest.
All right. There it is. Mr. Will, good to see you, sir. Thank you. All right. So next, how do you plan the moments? It's a serious question. Should Joe Biden do this again?
Now, make sure you, in fact, let people know you're a senator. I'm not going to answer the question.
Why would you answer that question?
The question is, the question is,
the radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Plus, double standard. We know the left hates Trump-appointed judges. What happens when Obama judges do things that the left doesn't like? Live pictures of the White House. We're told President Biden isn't there. He hasn't been for almost a week. He's holed up right now at Camp David doing mock debates, trying to avoid a situation like this.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence?
Ford later had to apologize for that, and it was one of a couple of things that lost him the presidency. Bob Barnett joins us now, longtime Washington super lawyer, debate advisor to President Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and more. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Leland.
Is there like a camp-like atmosphere going on at Camp David right now? What's it like there?
They call it debate camp, actually. It used to be that we went to a neutral sort of site away from everything else. When you're the incumbent president, you've got such a thing, and it's called Camp David. So, yeah, people are staying in the cabins.
A lot of pizza and beer and what else?
All kinds of stuff. And they've got a wonderful store up there. People are shopping. But ultimately, what you're doing is a lot of hours working with sample questions, working with refining answers, taping answers, reviewing the tapes, adjusting the answers based on the tapes, and doing full-fledged mock debates.
All right, so we played the Gerald Ford moment.
Yeah.
What is worse, not having a home run or having a major flub?
Well, I would say having a major flub.
How do you prevent that?
By being ready. By being prepared, as an advisor in 10 cycles since 1976, the greatest reward was when my candidate came off the stage and said there was no question that we hadn't practiced.
That we hadn't prepped, that we knew everything.
Absolutely. And you can do it if you work hard and if you have a candidate like Joe Biden who's willing to work hard because he takes this seriously. This is one of the times when the American people will focus. It's early, but they'll focus, and whatever he does and former President Trump does will have an impact.
You had the, I would almost say privilege, I think, of doing this with Bill Clinton, who was one of the greatest communicators that ever existed in history. I think we can say a lot of things about Joe Biden, even nice things, that probably would not be first to mind. How does it change when you're dealing with someone who that's not their strong suit?
The key to being a good debate advisor is to structure a system that helps that candidate. Not what you think is right, not what worked for the past person, but works for that person. So, for instance, when I prepared Geraldine Ferraro, she was a 3-term congresswoman from Queens, whose biggest accomplishment was being a co-sponsor of the Black Caucus budget. And we had to teach foreign policy.
Teach her everything.
Teach everything. On the other hand, Bill Clinton, you used him as an example, he'd gone through a whole series of primaries debates against smart and tough people. So it wasn't about the substance. He knew the substance. It was about honing it down to 30 seconds, 90 seconds, rebuttals. We did practice debated 23 times during that.
God. There is obviously what you just talked about the questions, how important the questions. But oftentimes it's not the questions or the answers on policy that people remember. It's the nonverbal communication, the body language, the sort of extemporaneous moment like George W. Bush and Al Gore. Take a listen.
13. That's what the question in this campaign is about. It's not only what's your philosophy and what's your position on issues, but can you get things done? And I believe I can. All right. I've had a record of appointing judges in the state of Texas. That's what a governor gets to do.
How do you change somebody's affect?
Yeah, those were two of the classic examples. With a head shake, George W. Bush sent a message, and it was devastating. And Al Gore, by his rolling of eyes and sighing, sent a message that was not helpful. What you do is you practice even such things as that. I'll give you an example, Leland. Let's say I'm the candidate, and let's say there's a camera here, and a camera there. Well, when the question's asked, I'm looking at the moderator, and that's the camera. But I want to get over here. But if I go like this, I look like I'm shifty-eyed. So you go down to your papers, and then you come up. It's called the bounce. You got to teach things as simple as that in terms of body language and movement.
Work on it. This was an interesting moment because I remembered it differently than my executive producer did. This was Bernie Shaw and Michael Dukakis in the beginning of 1988. Take a listen.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Let me tell you a couple things about that. We called that the death penalty answer. We practiced it 10 times. In fact, at a speech at Colby College the night before, he even used it. But when Bernie asked that question, instead of showing emotion, what are you talking about? Raped and murdered my wife? He gave a clinical answer. And that they sent a terrible message. And I'll tell you another example from that debate that you'll find interesting. We always practice what I call the heroes question. I'm playing the Republican. Who are your heroes? My heroes. Democrat. Who are your heroes? Well, that night of that debate, Michael froze and used my heroes.
Oh, you were playing the Republican.
It was okay because it was like Teddy Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. It didn't hurt, but that's how the thing can really go awry, and you can't really be totally prepared.
All right. The Bernie Shaw thing brings in an interesting point because my executive producer remembered this as a lot of people being upset with Bernie Shaw for asking that question. Seems like a fair question now in retrospect, but for 1980 sensibilities, it was very different. How important are the moderators going to be in this event?
I think there's really three parties on this stage, Republican, Democrat, and the moderators. And I think more than any other time, the moderators will be important. Why? They will have to make a fundamental decision, and I don't know what it is, whether to fact check. And fact check usually comes in the form of a follow-up. It's not their job to fact check every little thing. But I think they owe it to the viewers to see that if some clear, overt lie, like you were talking about with George, the 2020 election one, you got to correct it. And it shouldn't be left only to the candidates to do that. I think fact checking by those moderators is an important part of this upcoming debate.
Well, and also they'll be the ones who have the microphone, right? Because you're going to have, allegedly we hear, Donald Trump's microphone turned off when it's Joe Biden's time and vice versa. So the candidates can't jump in. It's the moderators who will.
Let me talk to you about the myth of the muted microphone, okay? It's a great idea, but unless you use isolation booths, like remember the old show, the $64,000 question, they're useless. Why? Because if you're talking, even if
I start interrupting you, I'm going to throw you off.
I'm going to throw you off, but also that microphone is going to pick you up. So absent the isolation booth, it really is putting a whole lot of control into the director as to candidates speaking, and that has its own issues.
There is the knockout blow, right? There is the chance, and both men have it tomorrow night, to say something, to do something at one moment that changes everything. Reagan was forced to do that in 1984. He was the incumbent.
Yep.
And the age question, at the time the oldest president would be elected the oldest president, was brought up, and here is his answer.
I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Those were classic moments. Let's take the first one first. Reagan, in the prior debate, at the closing, had kind of wandered up Highway 1 in California, and the Wall Street Journal had a front-page article about his age and his memory. And so he had to do something that was a practiced, rehearsed, beautiful line. Mondale, to his credit, handled it well by just laughing.
Right. What can you do? Let me ask you this. What can Joe Biden do? If you were advising the Biden camp this time around, what's the knockout line?
Well, I can't tell you what the knockout line is, but I can tell you that it'll be one of his best lines in the debates last time around was, "Will you shut up, man?" And I think that was very spontaneous, but I think that kind of put the blow to the whole idea that of what Trump was doing. And I think he's going to need, I'll tell you the topic, I think he's going to need a line that points to what comes if you get Trump. I think he's going to get a line that refutes the notion that this election was won by Trump. And I think you showed the clip of George Stephanopoulos. I would say a different question. I'd say the question is, if you're elected, former President Trump, will you stop the prosecutions?
Interesting. All right. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Leland.
Thank you very much.
Good to be with you.
Still ahead, the White House again tightens Israel's leash in hopes of bringing peace to the Middle East. The first Green Beret elected to Congress tells us why the White House's plan may only create a wider war. The Israelis are stumbling into a war with Hezbollah that will soon, if it happens, involve America. Hezbollah makes Hamas in Gaza look like the JV football team. They are better armed, better trained, and far better organized than Hamas. Plus, they have all of Lebanon rather than just Gaza to operate in. And a war between Israel and Hezbollah would almost certainly bring in the United States. Israel is moving their tanks north, out of Gaza, and then heading them towards Lebanon. And the Israelis still claim the United States is withholding weapons from them.
It's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Florida Congressman Michael Waltz is with us, member of the Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Intel Committees, former Green Beret himself. Congressman, always good to see you. Thank you, sir. Are we withholding arms from Israel or not?
Well, it's become a little bit unclear, Leland. I mean, we know of one instance where the Biden administration admitted to withholding munitions, certain types of bombs and artillery shells that Israel absolutely needs as it prosecutes its war against Hamas, but importantly, readies itself for a much more difficult war, potentially against Hezbollah. So it's not all about Gaza, but the administration keeps making the relationship all about Gaza. I think the thing to understand is we were fast-tracking munitions through Congress, through a special authority at the beginning of the war, and the administration has officially stopped that fast track. So if they're not withholding, I think they're playing word games. They're definitely slowing it down with huge ramifications for not only the Israelis, but for the entire relationship.
All right, so we're just looking at video of Israeli tanks lined up heading north, so from Gaza up towards what you talked about being the Lebanon border. And you're making the case, right, that the administration is effectively handcuffing Israel when it comes to dealing with Hezbollah. Reasonable people can agree that a war between Israel and Hezbollah has a very high probability of spinning out of control with the way things are right now. Is it in the administration, frankly, in America's best interest for there not to be a war between Israel and Hezbollah?
Yep. But here's the irony. By so publicly hamstringing Israel, by publicly, whether you stop fast-tracking or even halt arms to Israel, Chuck Schumer calling for regime change, Biden kind of vilifying Netanyahu personally, I think you're actually encouraging both Iran and Hezbollah. They see this as a moment of vulnerability for Israel. They see this as a moment of weakness between the Israel-U.S. relationship. So as much as they talk about de-escalation, their actual actions are leading to escalation. And I got to tell you, Hezbollah has exponentially more rockets, precision-guided munitions, tens of thousands of more soldiers. This is a very, very perilous moment for Israel's actual existence. And if we wanted to help them, we would be going after Iran and their cash and their resources. And until we do, Iran doesn't want peace. They're going to keep funneling money and resources to both Hezbollah, Hamas, and we aren't also even talking about the Houthis that just sank another ship in the Red Sea that have stopped 90% of shipping through the Suez Canal, and that's destabilizing Egypt. So there's all kinds of regional ramifications. And when does this administration wake up and say what we're doing is not working?
Fair enough. And I think you and I both agree, and we've talked about that weakness is provocative, right? And we look at the map right now. Hezbollah and Israel have been trading fire back and forth really since October 7th, but it's been kept at this very low level. The area in red there is an evacuation zone. There's about 60,000 Israelis who can't go home because the military has a buffer zone there. And I think you make a great point that a war between Hezbollah and Hamas is a true force-on-force war. it will make the war in Gaza, as difficult and as at times bloody and tragic it's been, look very tame in comparison to what this coming war would be. All the more reason not to do it. And to your point, the Wall Street Journal, Hezbollah isn't getting the message by restraining Israel. Biden makes a major war in the north more likely, which I'm sure you'd agree with their assessment.
Yep. ...
The Israelis got to come and play ball, too, here. And it is unquestionably in Benjamin Netanyahu's best interest, and he all but says it, to continue conflict, whether it be the conflict in Gaza or wind the conflict in Gaza down, as he's saying, and then start a conflict in the north. At some point, doesn't the United States have the right to say, even to our friends, you can't do what is not good for peace and not good for America in order to stay as prime minister and not get prosecuted?
3 quick points. Number one, I think a long-term Israeli occupation, counterinsurgency in Gaza is not in Netanyahu's political interest or in Israel's interest. So I don't buy the notion that continued conflict is what he's seeking. Number two, when you have upwards of 100,000 Israelis displaced out of their homes, they have to take some type of action. It's unsustainable to allow Hezbollah to literally make whole portions of Israel uninhabitable. But 3, if you want to have difficult conversations with allies, you have them in private. Our enemies are watching. And what we should be doing is leading a global coalition against Iran and its support of terrorism. We should be drying up the cash. We should actually enact what the House has passed, which are secondary sanctions against Chinese buyers and brokers and shippers of Iranian oil. As I just can't say it enough. As long as Iran is flush with cash, all of this instability will continue. We have to go back to maximum pressure. That's what unleashed. Backing away from that is what unleashed Pandora's box here.
You know, Congressman, number one, it's hard to talk to someone who is better versed on this issue than you are. And I would also add, in terms of friends, it would be hard to have a more loyal or better friend than you are, and you are towards America's allies. It's always good to see you, sir, and have the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Leland.
Yeah, thank you. Tomorrow, we might learn if Donald Trump will go on trial for the January 6th case, either before or after the election. And that decision is enormous. Can imagine that decision comes out before the debate. The Supreme Court releases their decisions at 10 a.m. Eastern, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Live coverage here on NewsNation as it happens. And perhaps the most important case of the year is Trump's claims of presidential immunity. We don't know what's going to happen, but Nancy Pelosi is already quite upset.
I mean, do you have confidence in the Supreme Court?
No, I think they've gone rogue. It's most unfortunate. But it's unfortunate further to see what the other justice, what happened to the Chief Justice? Did he go weak or did he go rogue?
The oral arguments lead us to believe there will be a split decision, and it's likely to push the Trump January 6th trial till after the election, which is a huge win for Donald Trump. And you will hear all about the Trump-appointed justices and how awful they are. Rogue will be tame compared to what they are called. Just like how we often hear about how bad Judge Eileen Cannon is. She is the judge overseeing Trump's classified documents trial in Florida. Here's MSNBC's coverage of a recent decision they didn't like.
Girls, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. So, yes, not only has the issue of whether the special counsel comports with the strictures of constitutional law, that's been settled. That's been addressed in multiple courts, settled. We don't have to rehash that.
We can only imagine what would happen if Obama-appointed judges did things the Democrats don't like. Actually, in this world, we don't have to imagine. It happened yesterday. Obama-appointed judges overturned another attempt by the Biden administration to forgive student loans. Here they are. U.S. District Judge Daniel Crabtree of Kansas and U.S. District Judge John Ross of Missouri. Both Biden appointees, both Obama appointees, who overturned a Biden executive order. But you wouldn't know that from the New York Times, CNBC, or CNN. All three covered the Biden student loan decision and never once mentioned who appointed the judge. Quote, judges halt key parts of Biden's student loan forgiveness repayment plan, risking relief for millions. Judges block parts of Biden's student loan repayment plan. Courts halt parts of Biden's student loan repayment plan. Not only was the fact that these were Obama judges not in the headline, they were not in the entire articles. We checked all three. To the New York Times, CNN, or CNBC, it only matters if it's a Trump-appointed judge. Obama judges overruling Biden, well, those are just judges or courts, sort of mythical things that happen. Of course, no judge is above criticism, but we hear all the time about the threats to democracy. As George Will pointed out last night, Democrats are destroying trust in the one institution that would protect democracy and truly protect democracy if Trump gets elected.
Well, who's going to stop them? The courts are. Congress won't. The courts must. And at this very moment that they're saying, on the one hand, Trump is an existential threat to democracy, they're undermining the institution most apt to thwart Mr. Trump or anyone else.
Well, as we heard from Nancy Pelosi, that's what Democrats are continuing to do. And the media is going right along with them. And they will whenever Trump-appointed judges do something they don't like. Evidently, the federal government didn't learn from prohibition. Our new alcohol guidelines, the first step in outlawing booze again. Back to the 20s when we come back. To drink. Remember, prohibition in the roaring 20s didn't work out well for the government and the teetotalers. And while the government right now doesn't want to ban alcohol altogether, to be fair, they're kind of on their way. The Department of Health and Human Services are reviewing the current alcohol guidance. In the next week or two, they could change everything. As it stands right now, men are recommended to have two or fewer drinks a day. For women, that number is 1. They could change it all. The Department of Health and Human Services installed a 6-member advisory board. 3 of the researchers on the board have demonstrated in their work, we'll get into how accurate that work is, that any amount of alcohol is harmful, hence the debate. The co-chair of the Bourbon Caucus, Kentucky Representative Andy Barr, is here. He is the only man. The Bourbon Caucus is standing between HHS and all of our bourbon that they are going to pry from our cold, dead hands. Why does everybody hate bourbon right now and whiskey and beer and everything else?
Well, that's the thing, Leland. That's just not true. Americans love bourbon, and increasingly people all around the world love bourbon. And it's the busybodies, the unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats at the Department of Health and Human Services who are trying to, as you say, stand in the way of Americans' freedom and America's distinctive spirit, which is Kentucky bourbon.
Until we were doing research for this segment, I didn't know that, what the government guidance was. Americans have a funny way of deciding for themselves what government guidance they will or will not follow. So why does this matter, other than as a fun topic on television to talk about and if we were together, drink over?
Well, it matters beyond just bourbon and the nanny state telling the American people how to live their lives. It's what the Biden administration is doing across the board, whether it's telling Americans that they can only drive electric vehicles or that they have to discontinue use of certain stoves or certain products or not use fossil energy, the most affordable, reliable energy available.
I get that, Congressman, but just to be fair, all of those are things that the government actually wants to take away, right? The EPA wants to say you can't have gas cars after 2030. Chicago, New York, we've covered these stories, say no gas stoves or no wood-fired pizza ovens. They're actually taking it away. As I read this, and maybe I'm wrong, but no one's saying here we're gonna put in controls so that someone can only have 2 drinks a day 4 times a week.
Well, guidelines one day from the government and lectures from know-it-alls in Washington can lead to more draconian measures. The bottom line is the American people don't appreciate bureaucrats telling them how to live their lives, especially when it's not rooted in real science.
I hear you. I completely agree with you. So this is Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, on this issue. Take a listen.
And now these idiots have come out and said, drink 2 beers a week. That's their guideline. Well, I got to tell you, if they want us to drink 2 beers a week, frankly, they can kiss my ass.
And everybody drinks the beer. Okay, a sentiment I'm sure you would agree with. But this, to be fair, Dr. Tim Naimimi, University of Victoria substance researcher. I'm sure he's a lot of laughs to head out with on a Friday night. Alcohol is one of the leading behavior-related cause of health problems and deaths and some social problems and economic costs, ranging from things like injuries and accidents and cancers and heart disease, is what he has to say. Not that I don't enjoy wine, I do, and bourbon. Is he wrong?
Look, alcoholism is a real problem. And it's true that there are health risks with overconsumption. But what we're talking about here is not overconsumption. What we're talking about here is the federal government being overly restrictive in the manner in which Americans make choices for themselves. And frankly, we don't need the federal government to intervene here. We have organizations at the local level. We have private organizations. And the bourbon industry itself has done some very important work in encouraging responsible use of their product. And so I just think this is an overreach that goes well beyond what needs to happen.
You're making me thirsty for a bourbon already. Next time we do this segment, you're going to come in, and we're going to have a whiskey together as we talk. It's good to see you, sir. Bourbon knows no better ambassador or advocate than you in Washington.
Thanks a lot. There's 12 million barrels of bourbon aging in Kentucky. That's more than twice the number of people. That's because bourbon is America's spirit and it's popular.
All right. It is very popular, for sure. Good to see you, Congressman. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Pictures of New York City where the polls close in an hour. America's most expensive congressional race pits Democrat versus Democrat over Israel, while the Democrats' civil war, well, how it could actually help them in November. Live pictures of New York City. The polls close in 1 hour. And shortly thereafter, we will have an answer to the most expensive congressional race in history. And this is only a primary. And that's because the Democratic Party is at war with themselves over Israel. Pro-Israel groups have spent close to $20 million to take out progressive Congressman Jamal Bowman, who doesn't like Israel, or AIPAC, which is the pro-Israel lobbying group in D.C.
We are going to show AIPAC the power of the South Bronx.
Never mind that he doesn't even represent the South Bronx, but they're going to show the power. President and partner at Maslansky and Partners, Lee Carter, is here. Kirk Bardella, Democratic strategist, LA Times columnist, NewsNation contributor. If Bowman gets shellacked tonight, even if he loses incumbent congressman, is that going to put the White House, A, on notice, B, is it going to give them more freedom to tell the pro-Palestinian, Hamas adjacent, whatever you call them, wing of the Democratic Party, to kiss off?
Yeah, I actually think it gives them some freedom to maneuver. They have been in this tight box, unable to really move without alienating everyone all the time. And it's created this almost paralysis where by doing nothing, they're alienating everybody. And so a loss like this from an incumbent member who has been that out front and that incendiary, I actually think that gives the White House a little bit more political cover, at least, something that they've desperately needed this entire time.
How vocal of a minority, how large is the minority on the left of this far progressive ceasefire now group? How big is it?
Well, I think you're looking at sort of like 10 to 12% of the electorate there. It's a significant portion, but it's not as huge and as loud as they seem to be. I mean, you would think that was the whole party based on the way they're showing up at events and otherwise. But it is significant. And what's significant about it is if the Democrats don't embrace them, they might end up going to a third party, and it could have a huge impact on the election. Or
they just stay home, right? Andrew Cuomo, Jamal Bowman should pull the fire alarm again because he's going to be smoked by Latimer for New York. The message is clear. Anti-Semitism in any and all forms will not be tolerated in New York, and you can't call yourself progressive without making progress. Vote. I guess, Kurt, what is going to be the turning point in the Democratic Party if this is not it?
Oh, if this isn't it, if this doesn't wake up this is where Democrats be their own worst enemy, right? You have a politically unpalatable situation, incredibly unpopular when your own members goes down because of it. And if that doesn't wake you up and go, hey, this isn't good politics, no matter what you think about how this should all end in the Middle East, this is terrible politics, and all we're going to accomplish by doubling down on that is losing our own supporters and our own members in Congress, our own voice. So if this doesn't get them, then they're a lost cause.
You know, we often forget where we are in the political cycle, right? Because typically the debates happen in September before a November election.
Wait, isn't it only June?
Yeah. Please don't remind everybody.
Stretch it.
Can Joe Biden specifically tack to the center on this and have it still affect voters? Can he get back to the middle?
He can, but I don't think that he has a track record that's going to allow him to do that. I think he's been sort of painted himself into a corner, and I don't think that is how people view him. And I think he would have to do some things outside of this that are going to make him feel to the electorate to be more of a centrist. He doesn't seem to have been.
I think the good news for the Biden world is no one's really checked in yet who's going to vote in November. Thursday,
come on, really?
Thursday night is the first time that most people who aren't political obsessors are actually going to tune in and actually figure out how they feel about what's going on. Most people have not checked in yet.
All right, 72 million people watched the last debate, 72 or 75, right. I can't remember, the 2020 Joe Biden-Trump. What's your over-under number?
Over.
Over? Way over?
Over.
Are we going to get to 100 million? Is this going to be like the Super Bowl?
85.
85 million?
90.
$90
$1. Wait.
And 90 million, and the most the polls are going to change 2%, 3%?
I think the most will change. Exactly. The polls aren't going to move a ton based on this, but here's what's so important is that people have a lot of doubt about Joe Biden right now. He could give them benefit of the doubt if he performs well, and I think it's really most important for
Biden
them.
has more to lose.
Yeah.
Big stakes. All right.
Thank you
both. Great to see you. Here's Chris.